Shaundi Butts looked out the window of the Winfrey Insurance office, watching gray clouds gather over Pembroke Pines. 17 years of marriage, 2 teenage children, and the endless routine of office life had all merged into a monotonous stream in which there had long been no room for real feelings. She mechanically straightened the family photo on her desk, fake smiles for fake happiness. "Shaundi, Mr. Winfrey wants to see you," Letitia called from the next desk. "And he doesn't look happy." Leroy Winfrey, the owner of a small insurance company, was known for his harsh temper and unyielding principles. An old-school black businessman, he had built his business from the ground up and now ran it with an iron fist, tolerating no deviation from his rules. "Come in, Shaundi." His deep voice sounded as cold as ever. The massive dark wood desk, the Bible on the edge, and the collection of corporate awards all created an atmosphere of power and control. "We have a new customer service representative starting today. His name is Jamal Crooks. Show him around and get him up to speed." Shaundi nodded, surprised by the unexpected responsibility. Leroy didn't usually trust her with such tasks. "And one more thing, Shaundi." Leroy looked at her intently. "Jamal is special. He has a recommendation from his brother at church, but I want everything to be professional. We adhere to traditional values at this company, no deviations." The new employee was already waiting in the reception area. He was of average height, thin, with a short haircut and a neat beard. He was dressed in a simple but elegant suit that looked a little too big for his frame. "Jamal, I'm Shaundi, the office manager. Welcome to Winfrey Insurance." "Nice to meet you, Shaundi." His voice was soft, with a slight hoarseness. His handshake was firm, but his hands were unexpectedly soft for a man. As she gave him a tour of the office, Shaundi noticed how attentively Jamal was observing everything, as if absorbing every detail. When they reached his desk, she helped him set up his computer. "Do you like Pembroke Pines?" she asked, trying to make conversation. "I'm new here. Moved here from Atlanta. New start, you know." He smiled, but there was a hint of wariness in his eyes. Over the next few days, Shaundi often helped Jamal settle in. Something about him intrigued her, perhaps his reserve or the way he avoided talking about his past. Sometimes she caught him looking at her, attentive, studying, as if he were trying to figure her out as much as she was trying to figure him out. "How's your new charge?" her husband, Tyrick, asked one evening without looking up from the TV. The beer can in his hand was already his third of the evening. "Fine. He's a quick learner," Shaundi replied, feeling strangely uncomfortable mentioning Jamal in conversation with her husband. Was all Tyrick muttered, completely absorbed in the basketball game. Their communication had long since been reduced to such short exchanges. Tyrick, once cheerful and attentive, now spent more and more time either in the garage where he worked or with friends drinking. Their marital bed had become a cold territory of rare mechanical encounters. One morning, a package was delivered to the office for Shaundi. Inside was a heavy cast-iron statuette, the Employee of the Year award. Attached was a note from Leroy. "For 10 years of impeccable service. I hope you will continue to be an example to all." Shaundi placed the statuette on her desk. The heavy figure of an eagle holding a shield with the company logo looked impressive, but for some reason it did not make her feel proud. 10 years of her life had been devoted to this place, and what had she received in return? A dry note and a piece of metal? "Nice piece," Jamal remarked, stopping at her desk. "Congratulations." "Thanks," Shaundi smiled weakly. "I'm not sure it's cause for celebration." "Why not? 10 years is impressive. 10 years in the same chair, doing the same job." She shook her head. "It doesn't really feel like an achievement." Jamal looked at her intently. "Sometimes we get stuck in a life we didn't choose, or that is no longer ours." There was a subtext to his words that Shaundi couldn't quite grasp, but it resonated with her own feelings. That day, during their lunch break, they went to a small cafe near the office for the first time. The conversation flowed easily, jumping from work to movies, music, books. Jamal turned out to be a well-read and observant conversationalist, with a subtle sense of humor and unexpected depth of thought. "I would never have guessed you were a jazz fan," Shaundi remarked when he mentioned his vinyl collection. "There are many things that aren't visible at first glance," Jamal replied with a slight smile. We are all more than we appear to be. In the weeks that followed, they often had lunch together. Shandi found herself looking forward to these moments. Around Jamal, she felt alive. He listened to her, really listened, which was a rare experience in her life. Leroy Winfrey watched their growing friendship with obvious disapproval. One day, he called Shandi into his office. "You're spending too much time with the new employee," he said bluntly. "It could give the wrong impression." "I'm just helping him settle in," Shandi replied, feeling the color rise to her cheeks. "In our company, we value professional relationships and traditional morals," Leroy said, tapping his finger on the Bible lying on the desk. Sunday is the Lord's Day, but the other 6 days of the week belong to work and family. Don't forget that. As she left his office, Shandi felt a mixture of anger and shame. Who did he think he was to tell her who she could talk to? And why did he even think there was something between her and Jamal? But was there any truth to Leroy's words? Was she starting to feel something more than just friendship for her new coworker? This question ran through her mind that evening as she prepared dinner for her family. Tarek was late again, and the children were busy with their own activities. Shandi felt invisible in her own home. A month after Jamal joined the company, there was a small corporate party to celebrate the company's 15th anniversary. Leroy gave a solemn speech about family values and hard work, quoted a few Bible verses, and then quickly left, citing a church meeting. Shandi wore her best dress to the party, a dark blue, form-fitting dress that she hadn't taken out of her closet in years. When she entered the room, Jamal's gaze lingered on her a little longer than usual. "You look stunning," he said, handing her a glass of champagne. "Thank you," she said, feeling her heart beat faster. "It's not often I get a chance to dress up." "Isn't your husband coming?" "No, he has other plans." The evening passed in a relaxed atmosphere. Colleagues danced, laughed, and drank. Shandi and Jamal stayed together, talking in a corner of the room, creating their own little world in the middle of the noisy party. When most of the guests had left, they were alone on the restaurant balcony, looking at the nightlights of Pembroke Pines. "Can I ask you a personal question?" Shandi asked, feeling slightly dizzy from the champagne. "Sure. Why are you so secretive about your past? I know almost nothing about you." Jamal was silent for a long time, staring at the horizon. Then he turned to her, his eyes filled with determination mixed with anxiety. "Because my past is more complicated than most people's." He took a deep breath. "Shandi, I wasn't always the way you see me now." "What do you mean?" "I was born a woman. My name was Jamika." Shandi blinked, trying to process what she had heard. Jamal was transgender? That explained a lot. His soft hands, his lack of an Adam's apple, his caution when talking about the past. "I started transitioning 5 years ago," Jamal continued, watching her reaction closely. "Hormone therapy, top surgery. I moved here to start a new life where no one knows my past." "And Leroy, does he know?" "No. He only knows that I was recommended by a friend from church, but if he found out—" Jamal shook his head. "People like him think people like me are perverts, sinners. He'd fire me on the spot." Shandi felt her heart tighten with compassion, and something else, something deeper and more personal. "Thank you for trusting me," she said, gently taking his hand. "It doesn't change anything. You are who you are, Jamal." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Shandi knew there was no turning back. She leaned toward him, and their lips met in a cautious but inevitable kiss. Everything around them disappeared. The office, Leroy, her husband, her obligations. All that remained were the two of them, their breath, their hands finding each other in the darkness. "Let's go to my place," Jamal whispered. "I live alone." And Shandi, a woman who had been faithful to her unloving husband for 17 years, who had never broken the rules, nodded, feeling something new, dangerous, and beautiful at the same time being born inside her. Morning came with a headache and heaviness in her chest. Shandi stared at the ceiling of Jamal's apartment, listening to his steady breathing beside her. What had she done? 17 years of marriage wiped out in one night of passion. But even now, despite the pangs of conscience, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Jamal turned and opened his eyes. His gaze was clear, without a shadow of doubt or remorse. "Good morning," he said quietly. "How are you?" "Confused," Shandi replied honestly. "I've never done this before. I didn't think I was capable of that." Jamal gently touched her face. "Do you regret it?" She should have said yes. She should have gotten up, gotten dressed, and left, forgetting the night as a mistake made in a moment of weakness. But instead, she shook her head. "No, and that scares me the most." Their lips met again, and Shandi felt a flame she thought had long been extinguished ignite inside her. Late in the morning, she returned home, lying to Tirik about urgent work and spending the night at a friend's house. He just shrugged, too absorbed in his own affairs to notice her blush or the new sparkle in her eyes. At the office, Shandi and Jamal tried to act normal. No special looks, no touching, nothing that could give them away. But Shandi's inner world was turned upside down. Every time she saw Jamal, her heart started beating faster, and her body remembered his touch. Their first night together marked the beginning of a secret romance that grew stronger with each passing day. They would meet at Jamal's apartment, sometimes at motels on the outskirts of town, creating stolen moments of happiness in their complicated lives. One evening, lying in Jamal's bed after making love, Shandi dared to ask the question that had been on her mind for so long. "Can I ask you something personal?" Jamal, lying next to her, nodded. "Of course. You said you had upper surgery. What about lower?" There was a silence. Jamal sat up in bed, wrapping his arms around his knees. "No. I decided not to do it. Yet. That surgery is more complicated, more expensive, and the results aren't always satisfactory." He turned to her, his eyes filled with anxiety. "Is that a problem for you?" Shandi thought for a moment. When they first got together, she had been surprised to discover that Jamal had retained his female genitalia. But her surprise had quickly given way to acceptance. What mattered was not his gender, but how she felt when she was with him, alive, desired, real. "No," she replied sincerely. "It's not a problem. You're Jamal, and that's enough." She reached out and touched his cheek. "I love you just the way you are." The words came out on their own, and only after she said them did Shandi realize they were true. She had truly fallen in love with him, with all his complexity, vulnerability, and strength. Jamal looked at her with amazement, which slowly turned into a warm smile. "I love you too, Shandi, and it's the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me." They both understood the danger of their feelings. A relationship between a married woman and a transgender man in a small town where everyone knows everyone, under the thumb of a fanatical boss, it was a recipe for disaster. But, as is often the case with forbidden love, the danger only intensified their attraction. At the office, they continued to play their roles. Shandi was the model employee and family woman. Jamal was the reserved, professional colleague. But sometimes their masks slipped. A casual touch when passing documents, a lingering glance across the room, a half smile with a secret meaning. The heavy cast-iron statuette on Shandi's desk, a symbol of her loyalty to the company, now seemed like an ironic reminder of her double life. Once, Jamal, passing by, lightly touched the statuette with his fingers. "I wonder what Leroy would say if he knew that his model employee was betraying all his values." "We'd better not find out," Shandi replied, though there was no real fear in her voice. Deep down, she almost wanted everything to come out so she could stop living a lie. And the lies multiplied. To her husband, she lied about late meetings and work projects. To her colleagues, she lied about chance encounters with Jamal at work. To herself, she lied that it was all temporary, that she would soon make a decision and change her life. Leroy Winfrey, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly suspicious. His sharp gaze noticed things that others missed, how Shandi and Jamal avoided looking at each other at meetings, how their lunch breaks sometimes coincided, how an invisible but palpable tension had arisen between them. One day he stopped Shandi in the hallway after a meeting. "Mrs. Butts, I've noticed some changes in your behavior lately." Chandra felt her heart skip a beat, but she kept her composure. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Winfrey." "I'm a straightforward man, Chandra, And I don't tolerate sin in my company. Leroy tapped the small Bible he always carried in his jacket pocket. Especially sin that perverts the nature intended by God. I still don't understand what you're getting at, Shandi said, trying to keep her voice steady. I've seen the way you look at Crooks, and the way he looks at you. Leroy leaned closer. Think about your husband, your children. Think about your soul. Shandi felt anger rising inside her. What right did this man have to judge her? But she held back, knowing that open confrontation would only confirm his suspicions. Mr. Winfrey, I appreciate your concern, but I assure you that my relationship with my colleagues is strictly professional. Leroy looked at her with a long, appraising gaze, then nodded slowly. I hope so, for both of your sakes. That evening, Shandi told Jamal about her conversation with Leroy. He suspects something, she said, pacing nervously around Jamal's apartment. Maybe we should be more careful, or maybe I should quit. Jamal sat on the couch, looking at her thoughtfully. And then what? You'll leave your husband? We'll be together openly? The questions hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Shandi stopped, pressing her hands to her face. I don't know, Jamal. I'm confused. I love you, but I have children. I have responsibilities. You have responsibilities to yourself, Jamal said gently. The right to be happy. He stood up and hugged her, and in his arms Shandi found temporary refuge from the storm raging in her soul. Their affair continued, becoming increasingly risky. Once, they even allowed themselves a brief kiss in an empty conference room, not noticing the security camera in the corner. Fortunately, the security system was only checked in the event of an incident, and their moment of weakness went unnoticed. The cast-iron figurine on Shandi's desk became a kind of talisman for them. Every morning when she came to work, she would touch the cold metal, as if checking that her secret was still there. Once, Jamal jokingly called the figurine their witness, and although Shandi laughed, there was a disturbing truth in his words. Leroy, meanwhile, intensified his religious rhetoric in the office. He began every meeting with a prayer, quoted the Bible on every occasion, and often spoke of the moral decay of modern society. God created men and women different in nature and purpose, he declared once during a discussion of the company's new diversity and inclusion policy, and attempts to erase those differences are contrary to his design. Shandi felt Jamal tense up next to her, but his face remained impassive. Later, when they were alone, he admitted that such speeches made him feel like a stranger, wrong, sinful. Sometimes I think he knows somehow, Jamal said, staring out the window, that he can see right through me. That's impossible, Shandi protested, even though she sometimes caught Leroy studying her, as if trying to read her mind. That night, lying in bed with Jamal, Shandi thought seriously about the future for the first time. Could she leave her husband and start a new life? What would her children say if they found out their mother was in love with a transgender man? How would her neighbors, friends, and colleagues react? What are you thinking about? Jamal asked, noticing her thoughtfulness. About us. About whether we have a future. Jamal rolled onto his side, propping himself up on his elbow, and looked at her seriously. Shandi, I know I'm asking a lot. You're risking everything for a relationship that may not have a future. Maybe we should— No, she interrupted, pressing her finger to his lips. Don't say that. I don't want to lose you. Their lips met in a desperate kiss, and soon all thoughts of the future dissolved into the present moment, into the warmth of their bodies, into the beating of their hearts. The next day at the office, Leroy announced an unscheduled audit of the accounting department that would require him to stay late. He warned that all employees had to leave the building by 6 p.m. so as not to disturb the auditors. Finally, he'll be busy with his auditors instead of spying on us, Jamal whispered as he passed Shandi's desk. She smiled, but something in his words sparked a dangerous idea in her mind. The office would be empty. Leroy would be busy with the auditors in another wing of the building. She and Jamal could— No, that would be crazy. Too risky, too reckless. But the thought stayed with her all day, becoming more and more tempting. When Jamal stopped at her desk before leaving, she leaned over and whispered, "Come back at 7. I'll be waiting in my office." His eyes widened in surprise and excitement. Are you sure? It's risky. Leroy will be busy with auditors on another floor. No one will know. Jamal hesitated. What if we get caught? We won't. Shandi smiled, feeling strangely excited by the thought of the forbidden. Just this once, in my office. She glanced at the cast iron statuette on her desk, a symbol of loyalty and service to the company. What would Leroy say if he saw his model employee using her office for a rendezvous with her transgender lover? The thought should have frightened her, but instead she felt a rush of adrenaline. Just once, one night in the office after everyone else had left. At 7. Jamal finally nodded, and in his eyes, Shandi saw a reflection of her own recklessness and desire. They didn't know that this decision would change their lives forever. That the cast iron figurine on Shandi's desk would become not just a witness, but an instrument of their fate. That their passion would lead to a tragedy that none of them could have foreseen. But at that moment, looking at each other across the table, all they could see was the opportunity to steal another moment of happiness in their complicated, tangled lives. 7, Shandi repeated, and it was both a promise and a sentence. At exactly 7 o'clock in the evening, Shandi heard a soft knock on the door of her office. She quickly straightened her blouse and glanced at the small mirror hanging on the wall. Her heart was pounding wildly, with fear, excitement, and anticipation all at once. Come in, she said, trying to keep her voice calm. Jamal slipped inside and closed the door carefully behind him. For a moment, they just stared at each other, realizing the recklessness of their decision. Are you sure Leroy won't come here? Jamal asked, looking around nervously. He's with the auditors in the finance department, on another floor. Shandi moved closer, feeling her resolve grow with every step. No one will find out. Jamal embraced her, and all her doubts melted away in the warmth of his body. Their lips met in a kiss, at first cautious, then increasingly passionate. Jamal's hand slid under Shandi's blouse, and she felt goosebumps run down her skin. I want you so much, he whispered, unbuttoning her blouse. And I want you, Shandi breathed, helping him out of his shirt. Everything happened quickly, almost feverishly. They couldn't afford to linger, not here, not now. Shandi swept the papers off the table and sat down on the edge, pulling Jamal toward her. Her skirt rode up, exposing her thighs. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't hear footsteps in the hallway. They didn't notice the doorknob turn. Only when the door swung open did they tear themselves apart. But it was too late. Leroy Winfrey stood in the doorway, a folder of documents in his hands and a look of shock on his face. Time seemed to stand still. Shandi, half naked, sitting on the table. Jamal, standing between her legs, his pants down. And Leroy, whose eyes widened when he saw what he never expected to see. Jamal's female genitals, clear proof of his transgender nature. Jesus Christ, Leroy exhaled, his voice a mixture of shock, disgust, and anger. Jamal was the first to recover. He tried to pull up his pants, but it was too late. Leroy had already seen everything. Mr. Winfrey, I can explain, Shandi began, but Leroy wasn't listening. His face contorted with rage, his eyes bloodshot. Sodom and Gomorrah, in my office, perversion, blasphemy. He took a step forward, and something in his movement made Shandi flinch. This wasn't just an angry boss. This was a man on the verge of insanity. You are both an abomination before the Lord, Leroy growled, pointing at them with a trembling finger. Especially you, he stared at Jamal. You are a perversion of nature. You're not even human. You are sin incarnate. Jamal stood up straight, trying to maintain his dignity despite the humiliating situation. Mr. Winfrey, I understand that you're upset, but— Shut up! Leroy roared. I took a snake into my home. Devil's spawn! His gaze darted around the office and settled on a massive cast-iron statue standing on Shandi's desk. Without hesitation, he grabbed it. Leroy, no! Shandi realized what he was about to do a split second before it happened, but it was too late. With a superhuman roar, Leroy brought the heavy statue down on Jamal's head. There was a terrible crack, and Jamal collapsed to the floor, blood gushing from his head. Jamal! Shandi screamed, rushing toward him. But Leroy was already beside himself with rage. His face contorted with hatred, he raised the statuette again and brought it down on Shandi. The blow landed on her temple, and the world around her exploded in a flash of pain, then plunged into darkness. Detective LaShonda Gamble was not thrilled to receive a call at 2 a.m. A double murder in an office building on the outskirts of Pembroke Pines was not what she wanted to deal with after a hard day. But work was work. When she arrived at the crime scene, the forensic team was already at work. Yellow police tape cordoned off the entrance to the building, and the flashing lights of police cars painted the night in surreal shades of red and blue. "What do we have?" she asked the officer who met her at the entrance. "Double homicide. A man and a woman, the company's office manager and a customer service representative. Found by a cleaning lady around midnight." LaShonda nodded and entered the building. The smell of blood hit her nostrils as she approached the office where the murders had taken place. Inside, forensic technicians were working, photographing and collecting evidence. 2 bodies lay on the floor in pools of dried blood. The woman was wearing a business skirt and a half-unbuttoned blouse. The man was naked from the waist up and his pants were down. Both had their skulls crushed. "The murder weapon?" asked LaShonda, putting on latex gloves. "This thing," one of the detectives pointed to a heavy cast-iron statuette lying next to the bodies. A corporate award, apparently. The fingerprints on it belonged to both victims and a third person. "We're checking it out." LaShonda examined the bodies, trying not to step in the blood. Something about the man's position caught her attention. His pants were down, revealing female genitals. "What the hell is this?" she muttered. "Oh yeah." The forensic scientist, noticing her surprise, nodded. "Looks like our guy is transgender, FTM. We found testosterone pills in his pocket." LaShonda nodded thoughtfully. This added an interesting twist to the case. Names of the victims? Shandi Butts, 40 years old, office manager, married, 2 children, and Jamal Crooks, 35 years old, worked here for about 3 months. Has Shandi's husband been notified? Officers are on their way to his home. We should have an update soon. LaShonda took another look at the crime scene. From what she could tell, the victims had been having sex when the killer found them. A jealous husband? Maybe, but something about that theory didn't seem right. A husband wouldn't use an office figurine as a murder weapon. It was more likely an impulsive act committed by someone who accidentally discovered the lovers and grabbed the first thing that came to hand. "Who owns the company?" she asked. "Leroy Winfrey, 52 years old. We're trying to contact him, but so far without success." LaShonda frowned. "Keep trying, and check the security cameras. I want to know who entered and left the building last night." She spent the next few hours studying the crime scene, talking to forensic experts, and developing preliminary theories. By morning, she had several suspects, including Shandi's husband, who was finally found in a bar across town where he had spent the night. "I haven't seen Chandra since yesterday morning," said Tyrick Butts, sitting in the interrogation room with eyes red from alcohol and lack of sleep. "She said she had urgent work and might be late." "Did your wife often stay late at work?" asked LaShonda. "In the last few months, yes. Ever since that new guy, Crooks, showed up." LaShonda looked at him closely. "Did you suspect that something was going on between your wife and Mr. Crooks?" Tyrick shrugged. "Maybe. She changed. She became distant. But I didn't think she would. That she's sleeping with a transgender man?" Tyrick stared at LaShonda with his mouth open. "What? Crooks is trans? Chandra slept with a woman?" His genuine surprise convinced LaShonda that Tyrick really didn't know about Jamal's nature or his wife's infidelity. What's more, the bartender confirmed that Tyrick had been there from 7 in the evening until closing time, giving him a solid alibi. Next on the list of suspects was Leroy Winfrey, who was finally tracked down at his country house. He looked pale and nervous when LaShonda arrived to talk to him. "What a terrible tragedy," he said, awkwardly fingering the edge of his jacket. "I still can't believe it." "Where were you last night, Mr. Winfrey?" LaShonda asked. "At the office until 6, then I went home. We had an audit, and I was going over the documents with the auditors." "Will the auditors confirm that?" "Of course. We work in the finance department on the 3rd floor." "Did you go into Mrs. Butt's office?" Leroy froze for a moment. "No. Why would I go in there?" LaShonda watched his reaction closely. Something about his behavior seemed unnatural, too tense, too controlled. "Mr. Winfrey, what did you know about Jamal Crooks?" Leroy blinked. "He was a good employee, a little withdrawn but competent." "Did you know he was transgender?" A look of disgust flashed across Leroy's face, which he quickly hid. "No, of course not. I would never. My company upholds traditional values." "And what do you think of transgender people, Mr. Winfrey?" Leroy visibly tensed. "I'm a Christian detective. I believe that God created man and woman in his own image. Anything else is unnatural." LaShonda nodded, making a mental note. A religious fanatic with strong conservative views. Interesting. "Mr. Winfrey, would you mind if we took a sample of your fingerprints, just to rule out any possibility? Your fingerprints are probably on many items in the office, including the statuette used to kill the victims." Leroy paled noticeably. "Statuette? What statuette?" "A cast-iron Employee of the Year award. It was on Chandra Butts's desk." Leroy's hands began to shake. I don't understand why this is necessary. I have nothing to do with this terrible crime." "It's standard procedure, Mr. Winfrey, for exclusion." Back at the station, LaShonda discovered that the technicians had recovered the CCTV footage. It showed Jamal entering the building at 10 minutes past 8 in the evening. Then, at 8:15, Leroy Winfrey entered the building. He left at 9 p.m., looking strangely agitated. "Check his clothes," LaShonda ordered, "and his car. Look for blood." By evening, the results began to form a coherent picture. Leroy's fingerprints were found on the statue where the hands of the person who struck the blow would have been. Microscopic traces of blood were found on the soles of his shoes and under his fingernails. And when the technicians checked his car, they found a bloody handkerchief tucked under the seat. "Do we have enough for an arrest warrant?" LaShonda asked her boss. "More than enough," he nodded. "But be careful. This guy is a respected businessman with an impeccable reputation. His lawyers will fight for every piece of evidence." LaShonda understood that, but she also understood that she was dealing with a special kind of killer, a man whose religious beliefs were so strong that they led him to violence. Leroy Winfrey saw what he considered filth, a transgender man having sex with a married woman, and lost control. When the police arrived to arrest Leroy Winfrey, he was in his church, kneeling in prayer before the altar. He did not resist when he was handcuffed, only continuing to mumble prayers. "Leroy Winfrey, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murders of Chandra Butts and Jamal Crooks." LaShonda read his rights. Leroy looked up at her with a strange calmness in his eyes. "I didn't kill them, detective. I was doing God's will. They defiled my home, my business with their sin. She was a woman who broke her vows. He was a perversion of nature. I am merely an instrument in the hands of the Lord." LaShonda shook her head. "Tell that to the jury, Mr. Winfrey." As he was led away, Leroy continued to speak, his voice growing louder. "The Bible says, 'A man shall not wear a woman's garment, for whoever does so is an abomination to the Lord your God. I have cleansed the world of sin. I have served the Lord.'" LaShonda watched as he was put into the police car and thought about the two lives cut short by fanaticism and hatred. About Chandra, who sought happiness in the arms of a man who accepted her for who she was. About Jamal, brave and vulnerable, who risked everything for love. The case was practically closed, but it left a heavy mark on LaShonda's soul. Hatred masquerading as religious righteousness proved to be more terrifying than any other motive she had encountered in her career. As she got into her car, her gaze fell on a small rainbow sticker on the bumper of the car in front of her, a symbol of acceptance and love. She thought about how far society still had to go before it could truly accept and understand, and how many more tragedies would occur along the way.